September 11th. December 7th. November 22nd. Do you remember where you were? If you were on this plane on those days. Some of you were here for December 7th, and you remember, still to this very day, what was happening. Some of you have spoken about it to me. What was going on? November 22nd. Where were you on that day? Do you remember what it represents? It represents the end of an age of innocence. The first one represents the end of an age of invulnerability. Why, they'll never get to us, we're oceans apart. Why, this will never happen in our lifetimes, we're living in a golden age. And then along comes September 11th. And it changes forever the way that we view war, the way that we view conflict and violence. It also opens us up to the period from now till December the 11th of conspiracy theories. Why those buildings came down the way they came down, I'm sure that there's a conspiracy behind that. What about the grassy knoll? What about the second shooter? What about those conspiracies? Why, the Japanese couldn't have done that if they hadn't had help. The sinking of all those ships, the way they were all arranged and pulled into the harbor all together there, just waiting. What's the conspiracy behind that? Isn't it funny how our minds do that? Our minds look at these horrible, unspeakable events, and we say, what I see on the surface must go deeper. There must be something else going on here. I've never seen a building come down quite that way before unless it was a controlled demolition. So that means that this is a controlled demolition that we're viewing. You know, I remember where I was on that day, September 11th, 15 years ago. I was walking down a street in Spain. A gentleman, a Brit, came up to me and the two companions I was with and started speaking to us, saying, "Are you Americans?" We sort of backed off. "Yes, we are." Looking around us to see if this was some sort of ploy to divert our attention. And possibly we were going to be robbed or something was going to happen to us. He said, "There's something that's happened in your country. It's terrible. Do you know about it?" I said, "No." "Well, come, watch it on television with me. Really, I'm not kidding you." And then he said a few expletives. "Come with me." So as soon as he said the expletives, we knew that he was serious. And we followed him into a little pub. And we were watching a repeat of a plane crashing into a building. And the way it was viewed, immediately I looked at that and I said, these people they're being fooled. This isn't real. That was my immediate thought. Because the plane went behind the building and sort of disappeared, and then I saw this ball of fire go up. And I'm thinking, well, I've seen that in movies before. I know how they do that. But that wasn't the case. I saw the people. I saw, as we all did, what happened on that day. What happened is that regardless of what you believe caused it, 2 towers in New York City collapsed, and other ancillary buildings around it and so forth, but they came down. They came all the way down to the ground. The people who said we're responsible for this claimed that they did it because this was a symbol of the prosperity of the United States, and they wanted to bring that down. They wanted to bring down the economic power. How naive of them to think that by bringing 2 brick and mortar buildings down that they would be able to stop the economic power. Now, to one degree, they did, I guess. They diverted very much of that economic power over into a conflict that is still going on to this day. So a lot of that wealth and power and influence is sort of poured out there into this big gaping hole that we call war. And it continues on and on. But you know, unity has 2 great towers too that still stand, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. Unity's twin towers. They're a little different because they're based on scriptures in the Bible by Jesus when he gives the example of the man who builds his house, one upon sand and one upon rock. We all know those stories. One builds his house on a very weak foundation, and then when the storms come and the waves crash against it and the wind, down it comes. And a mighty great fall, says the Bible, occurred. The other builds his house, builds his castle, his tower, on rock. And the same storms come, and the same thing occurs, except this house does not fall. Unity has done the same thing. It bases its beliefs and its power and its strength on rock, solid rock. The foundation that it builds itself on, these twin towers, are prayer and meditation. Affirmative prayer and meditation. Those are the 2 foundations on which unity builds everything. Well, what are the 2 towers that come up from this? I think they are love and faith. That's what expresses out into the world. Love is built and faith is built. Faith is built, and it's not a blind faith that you just have to believe it and that's the way it is and that's the way it's always been, and don't question it, just believe it. But rather, on an understanding faith. It's built on truth and precepts and lessons and experiences, one after the other, all built until it's a tower in our minds and in our hearts. The other is love. Love is based on forgiveness, on compassion, on understanding, one upon the other, going through our lives. Forgiveness of self first, then forgiveness of others. Forgiveness. The ability to remove the emotional contact that we have with some event that has happened in our past. The ability to say, yeah, it happened, but I don't have any emotion around it anymore. It's just a happening. And moving on. Faith and love, two great towers in our lives, built on the idea and held together by the mortar of affirmations and denials. Not a denial that things didn't happen in our lives that we didn't like or that upset us in some way, but denials that they have any power over us. And affirmations that there is still one presence and one power working in our lives at all times to bring about a higher good for ourselves and for all concerned. They build on these precepts of truth. They build on these precepts of love, faith, all starting at the beginning. Built on something solid. Built on something that is unchangeable and undeniable. Something that happens in every one of our lives. Now, that day, 15 years ago, today, September the 11th, something happened that was unexpected and uncalled for. Thousands of innocent lives were lost. But if you look at it from the perspective of the absolutism of God, the one presence and the one power, nothing is ever lost. Nothing is ever changed. In that view of things, God is unchangeable. God is not perturbed by anything, because the oneness and the knowingness of what we call God or pure spirit still sees only oneness, still views itself as whole. It's hard for us to wrap our human minds around the idea that on September the 11th of any year, nothing's going on. You know, there's a Buddhist monk named Sherry Huber. Yes, she's an American, but she's a Buddhist monk. She's young, cute, just vivacious and wonderful. And she wrote a great book, a little small book, that says, after this, nothing happens. Meaning that there is only now. There's only this moment. There's no next moment. There's just this moment. This ongoing now moment. Once again, it's hard for us to wrap our heads around that it's just going on. Am, forever. Forever and ever. Just an amness, an isness that never loses its wholeness and its holiness. It's a sacred day for each one of us to remember that which happened in the outer, in the physical world. And it's tragic for those who, and it's only normal for any of us to have attachments to people and places and things in the outer. That's normal. That's just human. But there's more. There's more to be human than simply our humanness. There's more. Consciousness holds for us an idea of oneness that goes on and on perpetually. And it's difficult for us to hear the phrase about God saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega. That means I am the beginning and the end. Do you see that? That's a wholeness that's wrapped right around within itself. It doesn't mean I am here when it began and I'll be here when it ends. That's the view many people have of it. It's a wholeness. I am at one moment, at one point. Like the Big Bang, one place. The beginning and the end. For there is no beginning and there is no end in pure spirit. There's just an isness. When you remember these dates, and you will, we all do, we remember what happened to the President of the United States on November 22nd in the 60s. We remember what happened on December the 7th in 1941. The day that will live in infamy was declared by Roosevelt. And it does. Some people, they've forgotten that. They don't see that anymore. I'm kind of glad they did forget it. It is something that we don't need to, just as in forgiveness, we don't need to attach any kind of feeling to anymore. We can remember it. We can remember it happened. We can observe it, but we don't have to act upon it and retaliate about anyone or anything. And the same thing eventually will happen with September 11th. We will no longer have any American consciousness attachment of emotion around it any longer. We'll let that dissipate. We'll forgive. That's the wonderful thing about being a conscious human. Forgiveness, compassion, understanding. One of the twin towers. Love. Knowing that all of this is changing, all of this is coming about for a good reason of some sort. We may not get it right now, what that goodness is, but we can be assured through faith that that goodness is coming, is here, just waiting for us to be able to awaken enough for it to be revealed to us. The twin towers of unity, faith and love, built on solid foundations. I hope you keep that inside yourselves all the time. When those things come to you that assail your own lives, when things occur to you that you don't particularly want to hear or you don't want it to be this way, and you have some resistance to it and you sort of go into it dragging your heels all the way, still know that there's something grander in store for you, for all those that you're concerned with in your lives. There's something grander and greater. A happiness just waiting to unfold. Restore to me the years that the locusts have eaten, says Jeremiah in the Bible. There's a reason for that. Because the faith is there to know that this is possible. And it's possible for each one of us too. I hope that as you go through watching some of the celebrations, or not celebrations, but some of the remembrances of this day, once that you see some of these acts that will occur, that you don't take with you this somber attitude that this will always feel so dark. Because it won't. It won't for us or for generations to follow. Any more than for generations which have followed us, the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed or the day that the president was assassinated, mean that much. They're just dates in history. And this too shall pass.